All we need is a little understanding. Walk a mile in their shoes. And if we keep our hearts open-minded, we'll enjoy this wild ride called life. And if we keep our hearts open-minded, we'll enjoy this wild ride called life.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Annette, your host of the Truths We Hide podcast. And I am really excited. I always love talking to people, but it's so hard sometimes to talk about just the hard stories that no one really knows about. And I'm really honored to have today's guest, Lisa Kipps-Brown. She's amazing. She is the business reimagineer and opportunity miner with 25 years of internet experience and entrepreneurial experience. But not only does she help clients use the web to reinvent their business, but she also helps develop marketing opportunities and long-term strategic partnerships. All that stuff that we don't really think about, she does. So if you ever need anything, reach out to her. But not only that, she is also the founder of Colin Garrett's national awareness campaign to combat veteran suicide through his racing. So if you don't already know, you know how passionate I am about this. And I'm really truly honored to have her on here to tell her story that we don't know about unless you actually reach out. So I'm so excited that she is using this platform, this space, to share with you all the behind the scenes of her life. So thank you so much, Lisa. It really is truly an honor to know you, to even be a small part of that little awareness campaign that you guys are doing. But please tell us the hard stuff that we don't talk about. What happened when you were growing up, and what did you see?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. And as far as related to the National Awareness Campaign, when I was 5 years old, my grandfather killed himself. Well, and for the people who don't know it, the National Awareness Campaign is to help combat veteran suicide, the epidemic of veteran suicide, but really extends that to all suicide. So when I was 5 years old, my grandfather killed himself. He lived next door to us. And my two cousins, who were like maybe 10 and 12, found him and came in the middle of dinner. Grandpa's on the floor in the bathroom and we can't get the door open. And, I remember it so vividly, but I was only 5. And then 2 years later, though, my grandmother tried to kill herself again, right next door to us. It was actually on the 4th of July. And she had been in the hospital for depression. She was out and she was living with us to try to kind of help her get back her feet back on the ground and, keep her occupied, I guess. And so we were at home that day. My sisters and I were watching a parade and for the 4th of July. And she kept, I want to go do laundry. I want to go do laundry. So my mom was finally like, fine, go do it if you're not going to do it here. So I don't know, after maybe 30 minutes or so, I remember my mother going, where is she? As a mom, you get all exasperated. Where is she? And she went out the door. And I mean, we lived in our little enclave. Grandma's house was probably 30 yards from ours at most. And all of a sudden we heard the storm door slam. And my mother screaming, she did it, she did it. And she had gone in, I'm sorry for crying.
No, don't.
She had gone in and found my grandmother on the floor in her bedroom. She had shot herself through the head. And I honestly don't think that Grandma would have done that if my grandfather hadn't done it. And that's one reason that to me fighting suicide is even more important, because most families that go through that with one person either may end up going through it with another who actually tries it, but even if they don't, it's very common for there to be suicide ideation after that, or for people to feel like they're doomed to do the same thing. I remember being a child and feeling like, does this mean I'm going to grow up and kill myself? So sorry for crying. Usually I don't cry when I talk about that anymore, but thinking about it in the context of what we're doing. So we have that. And I have friends and who have also killed themselves. As a matter of fact, just week before last, a guy I went to high school with killed himself. Could not believe it. Got on Facebook, saw that he died. I'm like, what the heck happened? And I found out that he'd killed himself. So it just happens too frequently all across the country, but especially now with everything we're going through. And then you throw COVID on top of it. But, we've been at war for so long, and now we have the pandemic and the shutdown. And I just feel we're at a really dangerous time that the risk is increased so much.
No, you're absolutely right. It's just, thank you for sharing that. I know how hard or how difficult that must be to go back and relive that. And, it is not, this time especially is just so difficult for so many people. And I just feel like there's no way out. And I feel, it is so hard for us to use our voice to help other people, but it is so important for us to do that. And people like you are coming on here and saying, I understand. I was there. I had family who did it, and this is why I'm so passionate about doing what I do. So did you ever find out why that had happened?
My grandfather, no. I mean, we can speculate. He didn't leave a note. We can speculate, though. When I was about a year and a half, his youngest daughter died in a car accident. So my aunt died in a car accident. She was only 24. She was off living in Richmond, going to college and working. And so they had that devastation. Then he had a heart attack, and he was losing his hearing. So he couldn't work anymore. And I've always heard that when people have a heart attack, that often leads to depression also. So he's losing his hearing. And at the same time, my grandmother was in a mental hospital that we know now that she had what we would call bipolar now. Back then, they called it manic depression. It actually started before my aunt died, and we think it was kind of triggered by empty nest syndrome. Mm-hmm. But of course, when my aunt died, it got way worse. So we think just either the emotional burden of all of that, possibly the emotional burden of all of that, topped off with worrying about money, because here he is, he can't work anymore, and his wife is in a mental hospital. She was actually getting electric shock treatments. And so, that's what we think, just a culmination of all of that. With grandma, it was just the bipolar, and topped off with, losing her daughter and her husband. But as I said, I really don't think that grandma would have ever tried to kill herself. I mean, she's one of these people. She would put on rouge, as she calls it, and lipstick to go in the front yard, which is really funny because my mother never wore makeup at all. But grandma was like way too prissy to ever have wanted any kind of like somebody to find her, with a mess or whatever. And that's why personally I know that it increases the risk so much. As a matter of fact, my niece, who is now a college student, tried to commit suicide several times when she was in high school. She speaks about it very openly now, but my sister is a single mother, and every night she would be afraid to go to sleep because she would be afraid of what she would find when she got up. But typically what would happen is she would overdose on her medication and then realize that she didn't really want to die. And thankfully, she would come and get my mom up, or one time she was in college and she called her. But for anybody out there that's feeling like that, or that knows someone who feels like that, her counselor explained it to my sister, because my sister was like, I don't understand why she wants to die. And he said, it's not that they want to die. It's that they're in so much pain that they don't see a way out. And it's hard if you've never been that depressed. It's hard to understand what kind of pain he's talking about, because most of us think of pain as a cut or, something like that. But severe depression is actually physically painful to the person. It feels like you're drowning and you can't get out, like you're just suffocating. So that helped a lot I think it helped for my sister to understand, that her daughter didn't want to die, and helped her learn better how to cope. But another thing about it giving other people the idea, the average person, when they kill themselves, it affects 150 people around them, because obviously it affects their family and their extended family and their circle of friends, but then it affects everybody in the community that knows them or has heard of them. So that's 150 people on average right then at the time that they kill themselves. And that's not counting the ripples that go out for generations. And it truly does in a family, it ripples out for generations, because everybody knows it happened, and some people are ashamed, or some people are afraid that they'll do it, or whatever.
No,
but also other ripples as well, financial ripples, and everything that goes along with it.
No, you're right, and thank you for pointing that out. That people, it's true. We don't necessarily want to die. We just want the pain to end. So.
Yeah, and the people that are left feel abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a child feeling like, well, weren't we important enough for Grandpa to want to be here? We were right next door to him, and we'd go over there every day. Yeah. And my mom, all those years later, my grandmother ended up living to be like, I don't know, 87, I think. So she was in the hospital for months, but then she came home. You couldn't really even tell she had shot herself. She had like an indentation at her temple, but the angle that the bullet went in, the doctor said that it was almost like she had performed surgery on herself. He said she won't be depressed anymore. And she wasn't for about 10 years. It was so bizarre. She would still get manic, and after about 10 years, the depression started coming back. But I remember my mom saying years later, when we were all adults, just the fact that Grandma, she had both of her living sisters living next door to her and all of her grandchildren, but that didn't matter. She ruminated on her losses, and I guess she couldn't help it because of the chemical imbalances, but it really does. It leaves the people who are left, it leaves you feeling like you are not worthy, that you've been abandoned, and you weren't worth it for the person to stick around.
Yeah, that's so difficult. So after 5 years old, after you saw that, was it a little bit not easier, but were you guys, the family, more open to talk about things like that, or were you just?
We talked about it within our family, but Grandma, I remember there was like a place on her ceiling that it's probably still there. I don't know why the heck they didn't patch it. It was like where the bullet grazed the ceiling. And we, as kids, wanted to see what Grandma would say about it. We'd be like, Grandma, what's that up there? And she said, that's for my bad luck. And my mother was like, oh my God. She was like, that was not from your bad luck. That was your good luck because you lived. But it's like she acted like it was something that happened to her, and she really wouldn't talk about it at all. And we really didn't try to get her to, other than what's that on the ceiling? We talked about it quite a bit with my mother. She was open about it, but it was more from the angle of, not understanding, because of course back then people didn't really understand what they called manic depression. And my mom is dealing with raising 3 kids and her brother-in-law whose parents died, and my father was blind. He owned his own business. He could do anything, but still he couldn't drive us around, but yeah, so I've always been open about it with my kids. And a lot of people go, you shouldn't do that, because then if they know, and I'm like, I don't think that's right, so I've just always been very open with them about what happened and how we felt, and all of that.
No, that's really good. It is. There is a lot of controversy about that. How open should you be
Yeah.
with your kids? But then again, is how much are you going to hide from them to where they are clueless?
Right. And I didn't tell them when they were little bitty,
Right.
and they're actually adults now. They're 30 and 32. But by the time they were probably at the age that kids start being more emotional, puberty and everything, that's probably when I would start, a little bit at a time saying what happened. But I was very open too about how we felt, because I think a lot of times when the person is so depressed and obviously in so much pain, they feel like everybody will be better off without them. And if they can be reminded that no, everybody is way worse off, and not to make them feel worse, but maybe to help give them the strength. If you can't do it for yourself, try to do it, try to get help for your family so that they aren't left carrying the burden for all those years.
You are so right. And God, as you said that, it just brought me back, because that's what I needed when I was in my very low point. Was I needed someone to say, okay, but you still have two kids. You have a
Yeah.
family, and that's when it opened up everything. But when you're in that moment, you don't think about things like that. So you need
No.
to snap.
Well, and it's, if you think about it, if you're drowning, all you care about is not drowning. And so I understand that. But sometimes we can break through to people. And, with Racing for Heroes, there's a video on their site where one of Mike Evot's friends, this was before he started the nonprofit, I believe, Mike started racing to help with his PTSD from the war. He had raced years ago, and then he found that when he came back, racing helped with PTSD because it would take all that energy and all that anxiety, and he had something to focus on. There weren't bullets coming at him anymore, so he had somewhere to direct it. And one of his friends, there's a video on the site where he talks about that he literally had his gun in his mouth and was ready to pull the trigger, and Mike called. Was like, hey, buddy, what you doing? Let's go racing. And that was, that saved his life. And if it had been 30 seconds later, he probably wouldn't be with us now. And so that friend of his uses that as an example of how important it is to reach out to our friends and stay in touch, especially now, because everybody is so isolated that, and even if we're on Facebook and everything, it's not the same as talking to somebody personally and letting the person know that you're actually thinking about them, and that they're important to you. And it doesn't have to be all mushy. It can be just like, Mike, hey, buddy, let's go racing. Or, hey, I was sitting here having a hot dog and it reminded me of you,
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's been, I worry about people so much more now with the situation that we're in, because everybody is just so isolated, and it exacerbates everything. We have the financial pressures on top of it.
No, you're right. And you're right. It's just a simple little text or a message or phone call just to say, hey, how's it going? What are you doing today? Because you
Yeah.
never know who needs to hear that. Or especially with I think all of this and blogging and podcasting, it's, you never know who's going to listen, read, watch, hear it, whatever. You just don't know. You might actually help one person.
That's right. And something I picked up from my business coach, Steve Sims, he's the author of Bluefishing, The Art of Making Things Happen. He's awesome. Something I picked up from him that he uses in business, but I use it with my friends now, is instead of sending a text message, sometimes send a video message through your text messenger. And that way, that's a total surprise in the middle of the day for someone, and they get to see a face and hear a voice and see a smile, and it's something that's not, it's a little bit different, so it makes them feel special.
You're so
Yeah, so little things like that.
You're so right, because the technology has come way above and beyond what we ever would imagine. So there are little apps out there, or that video that you can do with your text message. So that's a really great idea.
Yeah.
About stuff like that, because you never know. You might need that laugh.
And yeah, that's right. And it makes you feel better when you do something like that. Not that you want to do it selfishly, but it does make you feel better.
Yeah, because then you've reached out, and maybe that's what you needed as well.
Yeah.
So no, that's really great. I love that idea. So how did you become the founder of this national awareness campaign, which is amazing, you guys. You need to go look for it. But how did you get involved with that?
So what happened, the end of 2018, Colin Garrett, who was a NASCAR driver, his dad asked me to help them with their online marketing. And Colin lives here locally, and I already knew his dad. So I started working with them. And then just coincidentally later, January of 2019, Racing for Heroes contacted me and wanted to talk with me about hiring me to do a national awareness campaign. I was a little bit familiar with them, but all I knew was that they do the racing part. So I looked at it as like a weekend getaway to help people feel better, which is awesome. But that's all I knew about. And they're based right here in our county at Virginia International Raceway, which is a world famous track, by the way. But so I went out there expecting it to be just about, these experiences. And that's part of it, but that's like the way to get people in the door. That's all that some people need, but other people need a lot more. They actually provide free mental and physical health services and job placement. They do infrared light therapy, stem cell treatments, very intensive holistic vitamin therapy, where with the vitamin therapy, the doctor takes something like 12 to 15 vials of blood and tests everything.
Wow.
He doesn't want the person that he's going to be working with. He doesn't want to know anything about them. All he wants is the blood first. Then he does this workup, and then he will meet with them and say, I'm seeing this, this, and this, and you're probably feeling this, this, and this. And they're like, oh my gosh. So what they do is they use that to help with it obviously helps with pain and everything, but also they help people get off of opioids with it. And so the entire mission for Racing for Heroes is to prevent suicide. And everything they do is free. Mike did not plan to start a nonprofit. He just kind of did it accidentally because so many of his friends were being helped. They had no paid staff. His for-profit, which is RFH Tactical Mobility, those employees were the ones that worked in the nonprofit. So 100% of the money went to programs. Well, I was immediately in tears. I'm very emotional anyway. I'm crying because all I could think of was, my grandparents and what we went through and what we went through when my husband retired from the Navy. He'd been in 26 years. He'd never done anything but the Navy. He actually went in during Vietnam. He couldn't afford to go to college, so he enlisted right before he turned 18, went into the Navy because he figured he'd get drafted. So 26 years later, he did 13 enlisted, 13 commissioned. But 26 years later, he had a bachelor's and a master's and a successful career, but he had no idea how to go out and look for a civilian job and how to translate his skill set to the civilian world. So I knew how hard that was on him and on our whole family. Yeah. So I could just relate so much to everything they were doing. And I thought, there's no way I can take money out of these programs. Mm-hmm. So the minute I left, I called Ron, who was Colin's dad, and said, is there any way y'all will let me promote them through the team? Please, 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 just a little logo. Well, Colin's older brothers are both active duty Army. And Ryan said, absolutely, let's do it. So what started out is we were going to have a little logo on the car. We kept putting them on the hood, putting them on the quarter panel, and it just kept getting bigger. And we looked at each other last year, later on in 2019, and we're like, you know what? Wouldn't this be so cool if we could just make the whole car be about the military? But not just fighting veteran suicide, everything about the military, promoting veteran-owned businesses and anything related to it. And so we just came up with this crazy dream, and everybody's looking at us and rolling their eyes like, okay, yeah, right, And then we decided we were going to crowdfund because you have to replace the money from somewhere. And so everybody in NASCAR was looking at us like, you people are crazy. You know nothing about NASCAR, so you don't realize this can't work. And so they called us the people's team, like kind of disparagingly, but to friends, to Sam Hunt, the team owner, and Colin, but between the people's team. Well, after a while, it started growing, and we beat our goal for Daytona. Our goal was 200,000. We exceeded the goal, and were able to pay for stem cell treatments for a veteran. And so then they stopped calling us the people's team in a joking manner and started calling us the people's team in a respectful manner, because they were like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This is just everyday people making this happen. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we've had to put the racing crowdfunder on hold. Yeah. We weren't going to go out and go, oh, can you give us money to, raise awareness about this other thing when you can't put food on your table. So we do have a small crowdfunder still open that people can help us keep Racing for Heroes treatment programs going. But the racing crowdfunder is on hold for right now, and we're out of money. So we can't race again until we've raised more money. And so we're working with some corporations and stuff to see if they will help, put up some money, companies that support the military community. But that's how the whole thing started.
Wow.
Sorry for being long-winded.
No, it's amazing because people don't understand what work goes behind all of this. And
yeah.
You guys have done for, stem cell treatment. That's amazing.
The guy that we got the stem cell treatment for has MS, multiple sclerosis, and they think it's from exposure to chemicals while he's in the military. So we paid for stem cell treatments for him. I think the first ones were in January of 2019. So I think he has a monthly. At the second month, he could stand up, and the third month he could walk. And I'm sure he couldn't walk very far, but he could stand up and walk with his teenage sons. And before that, he was on a scooter, all the time. And if he got up to move, someone had to help him. 2 adult men really it took to help him. So for us to be able to see firsthand somebody like that we're helping is so gratifying.
God, yeah.
And we also brought the Rosie Network in, mm-hmm. who I'm sure that the Rosie Network, you're actually a part of it, but for people who don't, it's a nonprofit started by Stephanie Brown, whose husband is a retired admiral, and they provide free entrepreneurial services, training and mentoring to military spouses and veterans. So we thought, we need this entrepreneurship part of the puzzle because Mike was helping with job placement. So we brought in the Rosie Network, and it's just really cool, the things that we're all working on together. Much bigger than racing. Like one of the things we're working on is with a national retail chain that wants to carry veteran-owned products.
Wow.
So we're working on a deal for them that for us to bring them good veteran-owned products and for them to in turn support the team and help the veteran-owned companies be on the car through their support.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's the part about the car is the tiniest part now. It was the whole thing, and now it's the tiniest part. We'll be having an entrepreneur conference with Steve, my business coach that I mentioned, Steve Sims, author of Blue Fishing. It was supposed to be September 10th here in Virginia, and then we were going to have a big September 11th celebration the next day at the race in Richmond. And of course, that's not going to happen because they don't know, but so we'll just do it the next year. But it's just a lot of different things. Oh, for example, Track the Hauler. We want to make the car hauler, we want to outfit it with one of our partners is an Internet of Things company, mm-hmm. and they provide wireless asset management. So they want to outfit the entire hauler, and we'll have a website, a dedicated website that people can track the hauler all over the country, see where it is, and we can turn it into a mobile meetup spot. So if you go to that hauler, number one, you can get information about these free services that are available. But number two, you will be able to be around people who know how you feel. So military spouses, whoever, fans, everybody will know that they can just meet up there and be able to see people that they have something in common with.
That's just what an incredible thing. You guys have done so much. It's just so amazing. I love when there's like-minded, like-hearted people working together to make it to a much bigger thing than they ever dreamed.
Yeah. Well, and Ryan and I always say we share a brain and we're dangerous together because we come up with something goes from this little idea to this huge idea, but you got to make things happen in between, you know. So we keep having to back up. We have to take this step by step. But I even have this idea, you're too young to remember, but you may have heard of it. Charles Kuralt on the CBS Evening News used to have this show called On the Road with Charles Kuralt. And this was in the early 70s when interstates were just getting big. And so people were missing Americana because now they're on interstates. So he started this thing where he traveled all over the country on probably like some kind of RV. And he went from little town to little town and featured all these little towns that you miss when you're on the interstate. It was so cool, so much fun to watch. And it gave these towns a lot of publicity. So we had this dream. We're like, oh my gosh, what if we could get somebody to donate an RV and then we could hire a retired military couple to just travel around the country, go from town to town, spread the word about everything that our nonprofits have to offer, and promote these little towns along the way. That would be so cool. But, we got to race first.
But it's so fun to hear about all these plans because you just, as you just never know what's going to happen. So it could happen. It could happen in the next couple of years. So that would be
right. And we actually plan for this to be throughout Colin's entire career, which hopefully will be 10 or 15 years racing. But, we've made a long-term commitment. It's not, let's just try to do this until we can get some big corporate sponsors. Right. This is what we really would like, would like to do through his entire career if we're able to.
Right. Oh, that's so exciting.
It's fun. But of course, everything I'm doing is pro bono, and Ryan has been paying for everything that we didn't have corporate sponsors for. Yeah. So he's going through a ton of cash, and I've gone through, been a year and a half I've been working for free, which I'm doing it because I want to, though, but it does, I get all sucked into that. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do paying work too,
That's right. That is hard. You get so excited to help, but then you're like, wait a minute, I still need to.
Yeah. But it's been so awesome to be able to meet all these veteran and military spouse-owned businesses, small businesses that I never would have met otherwise. And the other thing that's really good for me and my husband is, when he retired, we still lived in our military community of Jacksonville, Florida. But later we moved back to Virginia to be closer to my mother in case she needed help. And thankfully we did, because she ended up with Alzheimer's and we were her caregivers. Mm-hmm. But, now we're in a community that isn't a military community. And you don't really realize how much you miss it until you start being around it again. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've missed this so much. So it's been really good for us to be able to be around other people in the military community. I have to tell you a funny story. When we were at Daytona, my husband's 14 years older than me, and he was in Vietnam. I was just a child then. But so to put this in perspective, and we met, he'd been in for 20 years when we met. We were together the last 6 years of his career. But so, he's been away from the military for so long now. And we were at Daytona this past February for the races, out to dinner one night. And he's just yakking with Mike Evok and the other guys, the other veterans that are sitting there with us. Smurf, you probably know him. Yes. Smurf McPhee and Greg Buda. So we're just chit-chatting, and they started asking him about what ships he was on. And of course, the ships he was on are no longer. They've been decommissioned, like Midway and America, which is what he was on. USS America was what he was on when we met. And Mike goes, Tom, you forgot one. Just as serious. And Tom's like, what? And Mike goes, the Mayflower. And Tom just like died laughing. And it was so, if I had made fun of his age, that wouldn't have been funny. But it's something about that camaraderie in the, just, it doesn't matter even if you're like picking at each other. The camaraderie is so much fun, and it adds such texture to your life, and you don't realize it until you don't have it anymore.
Oh, I love that. And those are great people, Greg Buddha and Chris McPhee. Oh, I love them.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And you really need to get to know Mike. Yeah, I know he's going to be on your podcast sometime. I don't know if he's gotten in touch with you, but I'd asked him and he said, yes, of course I'll do it. So you'll love him. He's a great guy. And his wife is also retired military. She's retired Air Force, I believe.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes. And, I think this podcast has definitely brought me to so many people as well. And so I just really appreciate all of you guys. This is just amazing. Oh my goodness. Well, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next.
Thank you.
To see it. So you have to keep us updated, and I will put the links in the show notes. And just thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, you're welcome. And I wanted to tell you, I have a discount code for your listeners.
Perfect.
I have several packages on my site. One is a 1-hour brainstorm just for people that need somebody to bounce things off of. There's a 2-hour strategy session, and then there's a 4-week coaching thing. So I have a coupon that they can get 10% off on any of it. And it's just Wild Ride. So I was like, my brain just short circuited. Yeah. So Wild Ride, and they can get 10% off on any of it.
Awesome. And I will add that link in there. I will add the coupon code.
It's at LisaKipps-Brown.com. LISAKIPPS Brown.com. Just on any of the book pages to book. They can enter it when they get to the payment part. I've really enjoyed talking with you, though, and I wanted to say to you, thank you for focusing on the topic of the things that people don't want to talk about, because I think every other podcast that I've ever listened to, for good reason, it's about positive things and yippee-yi-oo-ki-yay, but you have to talk about the other side so that people aren't left feeling like they're alone. And I just think it's great that that's the side that you come from, but then you take it and turn it into the positive part of it. I love it.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to tell you, I was nervous when I first started the podcast. I was like, I don't know how people are going to take it, but I think that it needs to be said. Mm-hmm. And that way people can know that you can come out of it. It's hard, right, but there is light. So
because when you don't talk about it, people feel so alone. Yeah. They feel like nobody else feels like me. And then when they realize almost everybody has felt like them at some point in time, it might make it a shred of a bit easier to deal with.
Yes. Gosh. Well, I appreciate you so much. I'm so excited to meet you. I can't wait to meet you in person. I'm in Fairfield.
I know. I don't know when we'll get to do it, but
hopefully soon.
I know. I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being on. I really, really am so honored.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you later and see you on Facebook.
Yes.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Thank you for listening to the Truth Sweet High podcast, created and founded by your host, Annette, the founder of A Wild Ride Call Life. Also, a big thank you to all of our sponsors for each and every episode that is aired. We have so much support from them and all of our listeners. You can find more information at www.awildridecalllife.com.